Well, a very big hello and welcome back to the Local Government People's Program. My name is Adam Spagnolo and it's my pleasure to be here today and my pleasure to introduce a very special guest that we have on the program today. But I'll do that very shortly. Just before I do, just want to tell you about our last program. We got a lot of feedback, lots of calls, lots of emails. Please keep them coming in. Last time on the program we talked about the election of the mayor or the election of a mayor. We talked about a freeman of the city. We talked about ratepayers question time. We talked about ratepayers and councillors being gagged. And we talked about that all-important topic, rates. Today, as I've mentioned to you, we have a very special guest. Her name is Lynne Craigie. Lynne is the president of the East Pilbara Shire Council, based in Newman. Just as a matter of interest, the East Pilbara Shire Council is the largest municipality, not only in Western Australia, but also in the Southern Hemisphere. And we'll talk about that with Lynne very, very shortly. Lynne is also the president of the Shire. This is the Shire of East Pilbara. She's been there for 10 years in that capacity. She's involved with Wolga. She's been there since 2008 as a representative. And Lynne was elected president of Wolga in July 2015, so she's been in the role for a couple of years now. She's a resident of the Pilbara, but probably spends more time in Perth, going up and down with her commitments with Wolga. Lynne Craigie, welcome to 101 Business Radio and TV.
Thank you, Adam. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much indeed. Lynne, thank you. I really appreciate you being here. It's very exciting having someone of your calibre on this program because the West Australian Local Government Association is essentially a coalition of 131 councils across Western Australia. And you obviously represent that body, and it's fantastic that we can run a few things past you. I guess the first question that's on my mind, before we get into some of the meaty stuff, is the East Pilbara Shire Council up in Newman, and certainly the Pilbara, all of the northwest, as we know some time ago. It was a bit of a gold mine, not just for the miners, but also for the investors. And in recent times, of course, things have changed. And I remember at one stage, rents were somewhere around $2,000 to $2,500 a week. And of course, the properties were nearing the $1 million mark. I guess that's not so anymore.
Certainly not. We had cases where rents were going around $4,000 a week.
Wow.
And it was only possible because mining companies were putting 5 or 6 people in one house and using it as basically camp accommodation,
Sure.
having a cleaner and a cook come in and do the work. However, that's no longer the case, and houses that were selling, very average houses that were selling for $800,000 for a 3-bedroom, very basic house. Absolutely amazing. Now down to probably $150,000, rents at about $300 a week. Probably more where it should have been all along because really it was an overinflated value to suit the times and lack of supply. Supply and demand were just out of whack.
I think the irony of all of that too, Lynne, is that some of the brand new places, let's say a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, were actually fetching the same price as something that had been there for 20 years because it wasn't really about the value of the house. No. It was actually the value of the rent that gave it the value of the property.
That's right. And sadly, a lot of investors would have been burnt in that way because they didn't really do their homework about buying at the top of a market, top of a boom in a resource town is never a good time to invest.
No. Lynne, I'd like to talk to you about a number of topics today. The one that's, I know, dear and close to your heart is the Fire and Emergency Services Levy. I know that this particular levy comes on everybody's rates every year. We hear local authorities saying, look, we've only put your rates up 1.75% or 0% or 5%. But at the end of the day, when they look at the bottom line, there are a number of other items, such as the Fire and Emergency Services Levy, such as a swimming pool levy, such as a security levy, such as the domestic household rubbish levy. All of these add up to that bottom line. And I think most people just look at the bottom line and say, oh my God, my rates have gone up again. Yeah. Could you just take us through this Fire and Emergency Services Levy? Because I understand that it's not actually accounted for in the process.
No, that's right. It's actually a tax imposed by the state government.
Right.
It's collected by local governments through their rates, and it actually raises somewhere in the vicinity of $330 million as a state government levy. Now, only about 7% of that money gets paid back to local government for grants. The rest is used to supply our emergency services, not at a state level, not at a local government level. So people often see that and think that's part of their rates, but in fact that levy goes up continuously, and I think it's gone up something like 10% again this year.
Yes.
It continues to rise, but when people just look at the bottom line of their rates notice, they don't see that as being anything different, as in part of the rates imposed by your local council.
Unfortunately, the poor old local government gets the blame.
Yeah.
Because they've tried to do the right thing. I know that one particular local authority has shown a 0% rise.
Yes.
So given that that's the case, most people, and that was Cambridge I think from memory, most people would have probably have noticed that in fact their rate bill, if we can call it rate bill in general, would have been higher than what it was last year, not because the rates went up 0%, but because of the Fire and Emergency Services Levy. So Lynne, what you're saying effectively then is that out of that 100%, which is a state government tax, 7% goes back to local government, and the other 93%, I guess, is government revenue.
Their emergency services, it's a government levy. There's been quite a strong push by local governments to want to have that as a separate notice within the rates, so that they are in fact seeing it for what it is. It would be my phone.
That's okay, leave it, keep going.
So there's quite a push to have it actually sent out with the rates, but in a separate notice, so that the public are aware that this is not a local government charge. It's something we collect for and on behalf of the state government.
That sounds like a good idea. I think that's something that I would certainly subscribe to, because it certainly gives people a very poor impression, because they're saying, well, hang on, the council is saying that the rates have actually only gone up 1% or 2%, but actually my bill is about $300 or $400 more than what it was last time.
That's right.
Yeah.
And people do need to be able to make that difference. And as you say, most people read the bottom line of their rates notice. That's all they look at.
Absolutely.
We all do. When we get a bill, the first thing we look at is, what do I have to pay?
Yep. The 7% that goes back to local government, is there a particular reason for that, or is there a particular account that it needs to go to? Well, what is it actually used for? Do we know?
It's given back in the form of grants. Now, there's a review of the ESL, the Emergency Services Levy, at the moment, and we're pushing strongly that more of that money be given back to local governments for prevention and mitigation works, so that we don't wait until there is a fire for the need to have that money spent on emergency services. Let's look at spending some of that money on prevention in the first place, so we don't get down that path of needing it. But we see that as needing to come out of the ESL as it's collected.
Okay, let's understand what the emergency services are. As I understand it, it is the fire brigade, it is the police service, it is the ambulance, SES.
All emergency services.
All emergency services.
That are funded by the government.
Okay. And I guess, look, I mean, they do a great job, all of those services, and I guess they do need funding, but I guess the community and local government needs to justify this to the average ratepayer out there, because the average ratepayer is unaware that it is a state government charge. And probably don't understand what the structure is. So I think it's important to deal with this in a way where people do understand what's going on, and I think that suggestion about separating the accounts is probably the way to go.
You know, there's no doubt that they are very much needed services, and most of them are run very well. There's no discrepancy about that at all. It's just that the cost is seen to be a local government cost.
Right.
We fully support them being funded. We just don't see that it should be labelled as a local government cost. We want the differentiation there.
Okay, and you say that it's under review currently?
Yes, there's a current review going on. The new minister is looking at it. So, and Walbra are very involved in that review.
Right.
So.
And what are we hoping the outcome of that to be?
The outcome will be, just looking at how that money is split up, and as I said, if we can look at some of that money for prevention and mitigation costs, that would be a positive for us, and also for the collection of that money, for it to be seen as a state government tax, not as a local government charge.
Fantastic. My special guest in the studio today, Lynne Craigie. Lynne is the president of the West Australian Local Government Association, and also the President of the East Pilbara Shire Council. We'll be back very shortly with more Local Government's People's Program. Welcome back to the Local Government People's Program. This is Adam Spagnolo, and today I have a special guest in the studio on 101 Business Radio and Television. I have Lynne Craigie, President of the WALGA, which is the West Australian Local Government Association. And Lynne, you also have the other hat of President of the East Pilbara Shire Council. We've been talking about the Fire and Emergency Services Levy, and we hope that you're a little wiser, and I certainly am, after that discussion I had with Lynne. The next topic we'd like to raise today is elections, mainly because, Lynne, it is quite topical. This morning I opened the West Australian newspaper and I saw two big full-page ads basically pointing the fact that the elections are here. In fact, my understanding is that the nominations open next week, next Thursday, as in tomorrow week, which is the 7th. They close on the 14th at 4 p.m, where all candidates wishing to nominate must have their applications in by 4 p.m. Thursday the 14th. Now, with postal voting, and there are two modes of elections, which we'll talk about in a moment, with postal voting, I'm understanding that the actual postal voting packages will be received around about the 28th, 29th of September. And of course, people have at least two and a half weeks in which to complete these and post them back to the Electoral Commission of Western Australia. Lynne, your thoughts on the elections?
Right. Well, look, elections are so important, Adam, and I don't think that often people realise that they actually have a lot of power in elections and need to be conscious of who's running in your electorate, who is going to represent you the best at council, and vote accordingly. Sadly, because it's not a compulsory vote, many people don't take the opportunity of actually having a say in who you're putting up to run your council. And that, I think, is very sad. Postal voting was created to try and increase people's participation in this. Sadly, that doesn't always work because a lot of people get the election papers, put them on the bench thinking I'll do it next week and find them 3 weeks later, and sadly it's all too late. So whilst on one hand it is good, it gives people the option of not having to go to a polling booth, the other side is it can be easily forgotten. So we just encourage people, we really want you to be a part of this election. Look at who's running, look at those candidates, think of being a candidate yourself.
Yes, absolutely. So, Lynne, your message to the community is local government is the government closest to the people. Right. If you want things to happen in your area and you think that they're not happening or that someone could do a better job, well then you should seriously consider exercising your right to vote at these local government elections.
Exactly, and many people are often critical of what happens within their local government. You need to become informed. Start looking at why they make the decisions, whether it's going along to a council meeting, whether it's making sure you know who's running in your election and voting accordingly. Find out what your candidates are platforming on. Just like in a federal or state election, you need to know what are their beliefs about your community, what is it they think that your community needs, and how do they propose to do it. Oftentimes candidates will come out and say they're going to make massive changes and they're not really aware of the budgetary process.
Correct.
As a part of that, WALGA is trying to run, and most councils are doing it individually as well, trying to run information sessions for candidates. Come along, it's free, come and spend an hour or so and look and be informed about what does being a candidate mean. How much time do you need to put aside to be part of your local government as a councillor? What are the requirements? What are the things you need to be declaring and not declaring? All that will be explained to you in an information night. And I think if you're seriously considering being a candidate, come along and have a talk about that. Or ring WALGA and they will discuss it with you one-on-one.
Wonderful, that's great, Lynne. And I think one thing that needs to be borne in mind as well is that with council elections, there are two modes of election.
Yep.
There is the postal voting, which we've already talked about in brief. And of course, there's the in-person election. That's very important as well. With the in-person election, because the actual date of the election is on the 21st of October. So if you're in a situation or in a council where the election is in person, well, that's the day that you can actually go and vote. You actually need to attend a polling booth. There is provision, however, as I understand it, for early votes in the event that you're going to be away or something like that. And you can actually also have postal votes in that regard as well, I believe.
That's right. Yeah.
However, with the other mode, which is postal voting, it's all postal voting. And if for whatever reason you lose your postal voting papers or you've misplaced them or didn't receive them and believe that you have a right to vote, you can actually call to your council in person, even though it's a postal voting, on the actual day of the election and cast a vote. Because that will give you the opportunity to do so.
That's correct. And you can also take your postal vote to the council and hand it in the sealed envelope that it comes in. They will act as a collection point as well.
Right. With postal voting elections, obviously it's important, and a lot of people don't realise this, Lynn, is that not only do you have to tick the candidate, because once upon a time it used to be a preferential system of voting, and so let's assume there were 3 candidates. Essentially, if the middle candidate was your favourite, you would put number 1 there, then you'd say, where's my next preferred candidate? Oh, the top bloke. So you put the top one and the third one down the bottom. That used to be the preferential system of voting. Obviously, who received the least number of votes would obviously be out, and wherever those preferences of that person were directed would actually go to the next 2 people, and then the same process would apply and the winner would evolve. The way it is at the moment in local government, whether it's in person or whether it's postal, doesn't matter whether there's 20 candidates, you simply tick your favourite candidate. Getting back to those sessions, Lynn, one of the things that I wanted to mention just on that, I believe that those sessions that you were referring to are actually the day before, it's either nomination, I think, or the close of nomination. It's on the Wednesday anyway, so it may be, I think it's next Wednesday actually, and I'm not sure whether it's 4 o'clock or 6 o'clock, but perhaps a call to Walga or to your local council or the Electoral Commission of Western Australia would certainly provide that information for you. The other thing we were going to talk about, Lynn, in relation to in-person elections and postal voting elections is certainly in in-person elections, one of the problems there is that the turnout is quite low.
Yes.
In relation to the postal voting ones, it has been discovered that there is a higher turnout, particularly if there are issues. But it's been my experience, just monitoring some of the councils, that around about 30% of people return their postal votes within the first week of receiving them. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that's my understanding too. People are usually keen to, as I said, get it done, which is we think is a good thing because there's nothing worse than putting it aside and then hoping to stumble across it again in the next few days. If you get it, fill it out and send it straight back. It's never too early. And as far as the number of people that are participating, we see this as a huge factor. Other countries have compulsory voting. We don't want to go down that path.
No.
We think that people should want to vote. They should want to be involved. Local government is very important to your day-to-day living. Yes, the state and fed set the big budgets and that, but your local elections are where you choose the candidates who make decisions about the areas in which you live, whether there's going to be a park at the end of your street, what days your rubbish collection's going to be, what sort of things are going to be involved in your rates. So important that you get active and be involved. You have a voice, make it heard.
Yes, no, that's good advice, Lynn. And I think the other thing that people need to come to terms with is, look, if you're currently happy with what your council is doing for you, if you're happy with the amount of money that's being spent in your area, if you're happy with your local park, the local sporting club that your child goes through is getting sufficient funding for junior and for senior sport, in other words, all your needs are being catered for, well, competition is great. It's good to have 3 or 4, 5, 10 candidates. It doesn't matter. But look, if you're happy with the current system, you support the current system. If you want change, no good complaining, you need to do something about it. And this is your opportunity. As Lynn and myself have actually mentioned, the elections start, well, if it's a postal election, any time after about the 29th of September. And with the in-person ones, of course, it'll be on the 21st.
Adam, I think that's a really important point that you make there. It's not just about if you're unhappy. If you're happy with the way your council's operating, then you need to re-elect the people who are already in. If you sit back and assume that all is okay, you leave the way open for someone who may have very different ideas to slide through on a fairly minority vote and change the way your council's being run. So you need to use this voice you have to make sure you're getting what you want from your local government.
Okay, that's great, Lynn. Anything else you want to add on this topic?
No, just again, Walga will be running a series of TV ads campaigns. They may have already started or they're about to start, and really important, they're just to raise people's awareness of the upcoming election.
I'm speaking with Lynne Craigie, the President of WALGA, the West Australian Local Government Association, and President of the East Pilbara Shire Council. We'll be back very shortly with more Local Government's People's Program. Once again, a big welcome to the Local Government People's Program. This is Adam Spagnolo, and I'm delighted today to have in the studio with me Lynne Craigie from WALGA. We've talked about a number of things so far. We've talked about the Fire and Emergency Services Levy, the one that we all dread but have to pay. We've talked about elections, and we're about to talk about rates, Lynne. Most of you, in fact all of you by now, should have received the rates. And some of you would have got a 0% increase, not many of you, but some of you that live in the Cambridge town. Some of you would have got around 7%, and some of you would have got somewhere between 0 and 7%. Is that correct, Lynne?
Yeah, that's right. Adam, this year councils have been very diligent trying to be as lean as possible and to keep the rates down. We're aware of charges going up on everything we do. Utility costs are up. We're all aware of this current state position of the state budget, the tightness of their budget, which is due to be released next week, and seeing how things are going to be so costly there, local governments have really taken it upon themselves to be responsible and try and hold our costs where we can.
Fine. I think it's important that, and I think we touched on this earlier, it's important to understand how the rating system actually works. We mentioned that most people look at the bottom line and say, oh my God, my rates have gone up $200 or $300, even though the council has said that it's only gone up 1% or 0% or 3%, but it just doesn't equate. The way local government strikes a rate in the dollar, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is they look at the rental value of a property.
Yes.
The rental value might be $400 a week, although there's not very many properties with that sort of money at the moment, but let's assume that it is $400 a week. In its wisdom, and the council looks at what they're proposing over the next 12 months and the amount of money that they require and the amount of money that they need to raise in revenue to meet that budget. And in so doing, they strike a rate in the dollar and multiply it by the annual rental value. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And that's how we establish what your actual rates are. But then, on top of that, there are several other charges, e.g. the Fire and Emergency Services Levy, which we've talked about. If you have a swimming pool, some councils charge $30 or $40, and that goes on there as well. If you have security patrols, and most councils do, don't they?
Metro councils, yeah.
Okay.
Metro councils
All right.
do that.
Metro councils, not all of them, but I think most of them have got security patrols. And again, certainly in the council that I'm in, the City of Stirling, that particular council, I think they charge ratepayers around $30 a year, which is quite a reasonable fee in my view.
It's not a huge amount, no.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
With the market being the way it has been, Lynne, in recent times, a lot of the properties don't necessarily meet the rental value.
That's right.
Yeah.
So there's a minimum rental value applied.
Okay.
The difficulty is people will often say property prices have plummeted. If you look at the area I live in, people were have houses valued at $1 million 12 months, 18 months ago. Now they're not valued at anywhere near that, and so the rental rate isn't the same. However, properties aren't valued every year either. It's
Every 3 years.
It's done every 3 years to account for rises and falls according to supply and demand. So we try and even it out. What people need to remember, though, there is a minimum rate that's applied, which a lot of properties are subjected to, and of course councils have to cover their costs.
Sorry, is it a minimum rate or a minimum rent?
Sorry, it's done on a minimum rentable value.
Okay, and then the
then
rate
the
in
rate
the dollar
is applied
is
to
applied.
that. What councils have to also be aware of, what ratepayers have to be aware of, is councils can't just follow basic charges. It has to be according to their costs. Now, I'm probably not explaining that very well, but if a council has a cost, they've got to run street lighting, then they're subject to electricity charges, to all the things that you are subject to in your own budget. They're also applied to a local government's budget. So if utility costs go up for you, they're also going up for the council. So all those things get taken into account when rates are set.
Right. Now, people can actually pay their rates in instalments. I think most councils provide 4 instalments. And I guess you have something like about 8 months or something to go through that, which I think is great. I mean, I commend the councils for that. And I think in these times, particularly in these very tough times, you need that sort of provision in the system. Look, one thing I mentioned in the opening of the program that I've received a lot of correspondence, calls and emails regarding some of the topics that we've raised here. And one of the things that we have raised previously on this program is that councils are sympathetic to people that can't afford to pay their rates, and they do have provision for that. However, one person was complaining because they're saying, well, apparently, yes, they do give you time to pay if you can't afford it, but they charge you interest for it, and it's usually around 13-14%. Maybe that's something that your association could look at somewhere down the track. Look, we might not be able to fix it, but it's worth mentioning because it just compounds the problem.
Yes.
You understand what I'm
I
saying?
do. I understand exactly what you mean, and I think that if you're having financial difficulties, you should go and talk to your council. Never be too afraid to go and speak. Now, it may not always get you what you want, but it's certainly they're aware of your circumstances. I know with pensioners that a pensioner discount is applied, and they can also be paid off. Now, I had an example once of an organisation that was telling pensioners, you don't need to pay your rates. In the event of your demise at the end of the day, the total cost will be taken off your property. What people need to understand, it's not quite as simple as that. No. The council will take off the full value of your rates, not the pensioner discounted rates.
Ah, okay.
So there are...
That's a new one on me.
There are things that people need to be aware of. Councils aren't there to try and rip you off. They're there to try and leverage the funding they need to run.
Yes.
And of course they're very hamstrung on ways that they can raise money, and really our only way of raising revenue to run your local government is through rates.
Through rates and
grants from state and federal governments.
Correct,
and as we know, with the position they're both in at the moment, they're cutting back, not giving out further grants. So whilst we try our best to be as lean as we can on our budgets, we also need to be practical. And I say to people when I meet them, it's no good having a 0 rate increase this year if it means you're going to put it up 10% next year.
Correct.
It's better to go with a very modest rate increase every year so that we're able to provide the services we need to give our ratepayers and no shocks.
Now that sounds like the way to go, and that sounds like, I think, good forward planning, because I agree with you. I think that if you're in a position where you put up your rates by 0, that doesn't sound right, but the rates don't go up at all, and then, as you say, you hit them 10% the following year. I mean, that's a big hike. And
it's much harder to find 10% in one year than it is 2% or 1.5%, 2%, 3% over a number of years adding up. 10% is a lot of money for people to find.
Just coming back to the compounding interest, this lady that wrote to me or emailed me, pardon me, actually mentioned something along the lines of that, she was having difficulty. She owed about $3,000 or $4,000 in rates, and it's been going on for a couple of years. She's had a few traumas in the family. And what her main concern was, she appreciated what the council was doing for her, but her main problem was she was worried about the accruing interest, and she thought, all I'm doing is paying for the interest. They've got her on a payment program. So that's something that I'd really like to look into, somewhere down the track, because at the end of the day, your local council, believe it or not, is there to help you as much as they can. I mean, they are running a business, as Lynne will tell you. But at the end of the day, I think we just need to also show a little bit of compassion where it's definitely required.
And certainly that's something we can look into, because I think there should be exceptional circumstances when people are in tough times. We need to be cognisant of that and try and work with them and look at what we can do. We also have, as local government, quite strong commitments, or quite strong oversight from state government to make sure that we're sustainable. So we have to run like a business. We have to make sure that we're out there doing the right thing. And we often get accused now of local government should go back to just roads, rates and rubbish. What are you doing playing in all the other space? That's fine when it comes to rates, except go and talk to the young family down the road that has 3 kids that want to play soccer on Saturday afternoon. Talk to the family who wants to have things done at the swimming pool. All those things come at a cost. I had one man write a letter to me, quite virulent, and saying that me in particular, should back off, not in my council but across the state, and just look after our own backyard. And I don't often get involved, but I wrote back to him and said, well, which community facility can I take away in your direct vicinity? And his answer was nothing in my area. Well, hello, it was all about your area. That's right.
Look, that's the other thing too. Councils need to be fair. They need to make sure that all of the things that you've talked about are covered. And if people start talking along those lines, they need to accept that they're going to lose some of those services.
And Adam, there are services that you and I, at our age, I guess, with the children the age we've got, won't be using. And there are other services. I have people say to me, well, I've never been in the library. Why should we pay for the library?
Correct.
Well, hello, there are other people who use it. And there are services that we use that other people don't. So it's best fit for everybody is what local government needs to look at.
That's good. Talking to Lynne Craigie, Walga President and President of the East Pilbara Shire Council. Walga, for those of you that may not be aware, is a coalition. That's the West Australian Local Government Association. It's a coalition of about 131 councils right across the state, where each council has a representative on Walga. And Lynne, of course, as the President, chairs that, and they discuss items of a common nature right across the board.
And we also advocate for local governments. So
Absolutely.
Smaller governments, if we can find issues that are pertinent to lots of local governments, we'll go to the government and talk about that.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lynne. And we'll be back very shortly with more Local Government's People's Program. Welcome back to the Local Government's People's Program. My name is Adam Spagnolo, and for those of you that don't know, I'm actually also a candidate in the City of Stirling's council election coming up on the 21st of October. But it is a postal voting election, and postal votes or postal voting kits will actually be distributed around the end of September. I'm standing for the Osborne ward of the City of Stirling, and I'd really appreciate your support. Today in the studio, I'm delighted to have with us the President of the Local Government Association, the West Australian Local Government Association. We've been talking about a number of things, and I've just discovered as well that Lynne and I, we go back a few years. I didn't realise that we, in fact, had met in Newman some years ago. I do have some interests up in Newman, and just talking in the break there, we suddenly realised that we had some connection from the past. Look, I'd like to talk about the communication protocol. Recently, at an LGA convention, there was some talk about a communication protocol. What's that all about?
Adam, Walga has a local government convention every year in August, and all the local governments get the chance to come along. We run it at the convention centre. Mm-hmm. They all come along, and we have 3 full days of differing events. We usually have things with the state government. We invite the pollies to come in and talk about their areas of portfolio. And one of the things we had this year, and it's been in the making for some time now, is we've signed a communication protocol. So the Premier came along and signed it together with the newly elected Minister for Local Government, David Templeman, myself, and a member of Local Government Professionals who represent the working arm of government, of councils. And we signed this agreement, and the last time this agreement was in place was in the Gallup government, so quite some time ago. And we haven't been able to get it with recent governments. And all it says is that we're going to work together. Now, we won't always agree on the outcome. There'll always be things that we're going to argue over, particularly money. That's the way of the different tiers of government. But what it is a communication protocol that says when we're going to introduce something that's going to have a major effect on you, we're going to give you so many weeks' notice. If it's a more minor detail, there'll be shorter notice periods, etc. And we'll bear in mind that with each other. And the same with if local government has something that they wish to bring about with the government, we're going to give them notice. So it just gives both sides a fair chance to look and research what's happening. A good example of that is the previous government introduced removal of of local government vehicle concessions, which is a concessions provided to local government for the vehicles.
That like the fleet discount?
The fleet discount, and all the, more so than cars, it's particularly about the heavy earth-moving vehicles and all that stuff. And the last government was going to introduce that, didn't tell us, just basically did it, and it came at a cost of almost $10 million to get the stamp duty to local government. Now, it has a big effect on small councils that have lots of road-making equipment and earth-moving stuff. If we had known about that, there is always time to try and adjust your budget or work out better ways, but we didn't. Now, that has since been revoked. Interestingly enough, it was the opposition now that voted to revoke that, so that charge hasn't been done. But the sort of things we want to do is sit down with the ministers and say, well, okay, you need to raise $10 million from that. What's the best way we can do it? Can we be involved in that? Let's talk about how that works well for both sides.
Okay. This protocol treaty, how does it work in with the review of the Local Government Act?
Well, it really forms a great basis for the review of the Act. Now, the new Minister, Minister David Templeman, has been really proactive in saying he wants the Act reviewed. Now, we are going to do it in stages. So, as you know, the Act is quite an old and long-winded piece of work, and it does need lots of modernisation and lots of changes. At the minute, even the minister himself, in the event of something happening in a council, only has the power to stand down an entire council. Now, that's a little bit sad because in often cases there will be one councillor that is a problem in the council.
It needs to be dealt with.
It needs to be dealt with. This will give power back to the minister to say, okay, well, the rest of the council's doing a great job. How can we intercede there and help with that?
Yeah, look, I've often thought of that, and I've thought the minister is in a strong position. Ministers in the past have actually dismissed councils. I'm not sure that I've ever known of a minister dismissing actual individual councillors, but certainly have dismissed a number of councils over successive years. And I would think that with what you're talking about, with the amendments and the review to the Act, that in due course, if there is such an incident, then the minister can in fact exercise its right, or his right, and well, the council's doing a great job, the council is quite functional, but this particular councillor is creating a bit of havoc. It's not in the best interest of the ratepayers or the running of the municipality, so on that basis, I need to terminate this councillor.
That's right.
So that brings me to my next question. I've previously been on council. I was on council from 84 to 2004, spent 20 years there. Also spent 3 terms as mayor of the city. And I was actually elected under the old Local Government Act. You're talking about this one being antiquated. I was actually elected under the Local Government Act of 1960. In 1995, the new Act came in, and I think there were a number of amendments in 96 and 97. And I was only just thinking the other day, like the old Act, the one from 1960, that was 35 years old when they actually decided to repeal it and introduce the new Act. And when you think about it, this one here, so it's about 23 years old. So it is certainly due for an overhaul, that's for sure.
Time for a review, for sure.
Okay, what else can you tell us about the review of this Act or this particular arrangement or protocol that you have with the state government?
Okay, with the review of the Act, the Minister in discussion, we've looked at it and said, well, it's a massive task to actually rewrite the Act in its entirety. So as opposed to that, we'll review it in stages. Now, the Minister's been very proactive. He has included WALGA, the Department of Local Government, and local government professionals all have a seat around the table to talk about the varying things they think need to be in the Act or need changing within the Act. And there is lots to be done over, hopefully, the next couple of years.
Sounds great. I know that under the old Act, and I'm talking about the Local Government Act of 1960, there was a lot of power given to elected members. Then when the new Act came in, it seemed to have removed some of that power, and it went, if you like, to the officers. And a number of councils are delegating a lot of its power to the officers. Are you finding that, or is that the sort of thing that needs to go on, or goes on, or should go on?
I think very often in this day and age we employ officers who are very knowledgeable and very wise on the subjects. Obviously they have experience and that's why they're employed in that role. However, we need to remember that the councillors are elected by the public to sit there as the board of directors or the conduit
between
that
the
makes
community
the decision. That's
and
right. And whilst the officer may have some great ideas, the council will still need to look at each decision and decide whether they're happy, whether they think this will work for their ratepayers. And every municipality is different, and what works in yours won't necessarily work in mine. So
correct, yeah.
I think it really brings home the point that the people you elect to be your councillors need to be very much in touch with the people they represent and know what it is that these people want. I don't believe that we should delegate too much to the officers. The officers are there to give us guidance, but I think that guidance should be taken in line with our thoughts and our knowledge of the community.
Look, I always look at this as the municipality being the company,
yes,
the councillors being the board of directors, and the ratepayers and residents being the shareholders.
That's right.
And look, I think our forefathers, under the Westminster system of government, when they introduced local government, one of the things I believe that was foremost on their mind was to say, okay, the council doesn't have to be all lawyers. The council doesn't have to be all doctors and all people that have got some sort of academic degree. The position is it needs to be a mix of people, a housewife, an accountant, a labourer. It doesn't matter, because that is the sort of community, or that is the sort of group that will actually, in my view, give the council or the officers the message that the community is trying to communicate to them. And I think that's the thing that we need to remember in local government.
I agree, and I think that's the very important bit, that these people shouldn't all be lawyers around the table or all be accountants, because very often they're seeing responsibilities and seeing decisions made from a very different point of view to what Mr. and Mrs. Average see it, Mr. and Mrs. Home ratepayer. They want things done that suit their family, and that may not suit the best interests of an accountant or a lawyer. So it needs to be a mix.
Yes, in your case, they're probably all engineers up there, are they?
Not quite.
Not quite. Lynne, it's been great speaking to you. Unfortunately, the time has gotten the better of us, but it's been a real pleasure, having you on the show, meeting up with you again, having a chat about all these topics and getting your views on them. I do want to thank you, and the message I'm hearing out there, you're doing a great job as the president of the West Australian Local Government Association. I actually used to serve with your predecessor, Troy Pickard, because Troy was on the City of Stirling when I was there. And look, I think you need an association such as yours. That is the only way this coalition can actually understand what the general denominator is with all of the local authorities, and that's great.
And to talk to our government. Adam, can I thank you for raising the profile of local government?
Well, thank you very much.
It's really pleasing to see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Right, that's Lynne Craigie, President of the West Australian Local Government Association and also President of the East Pilbara Shire Council. Today, of course, you've been watching and you've been listening to the Local Government People's Program. My name is Adam Spagnolo. And I want to thank you very much for tuning in, if you're tuning in on the radio, or watching, if you're watching on the television side of things. We look forward to your company once again, very, very soon, in about 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, we wish you all the very best. And don't forget, local government elections coming up everywhere, not just at the City of Stirling, in East Pilbara, in Perth, in Cambridge, in Vincent. So whatever your local authority is, we urge you to go and vote, because that's the only way you can make a difference. Thank you for watching.